So I'll start off with a quite fundamental question to your area of research and considering the long and fruitful career that you've had within this field. The question being, what is higher education for?
Well, I think that one of the things that we should begin with is how crucial education is for democracy. I mean, it's a space where in some way people should learn how to think critically, be informed. It's also a place where people realize themselves as citizens. It's not just simply a space of training. It's not a place where people learn simply how to be consumers. It's a place where people come to grips with themselves as basically critically engaged agents. And I think if they can learn to speak in some fundamental way from a position of agency and empowerment, then I think education is essentially performing its critical function. But I also think that education is a very dangerous place at this moment in terms of the attacks we see in Canada, but especially in the United States. And I think that what those attacks suggest, that there's something dangerous about the critical function of education. There's something dangerous about empowering students to really raise questions that basically hold power accountable. And we don't often see that. And I think that what education has become is it's become a space of social and political exclusion and repression. And increasingly, certainly in the United States, it's become a place of indoctrination. So I think that, to make it short, I think that we need to equip students with skills, knowledge, values, and sense of social responsibility that enables them to raise questions about what the future should look like and what role they might play in that future. A future in some way committed to democracy, radical democracy, committed to notions of justice, equality, social responsibility, and freedom for all, not just for a few.
And speaking of this sort of future-oriented understanding of education, why is it that students should be socially engaged? Why should they be politically active? Why is it that students should take it upon themselves to change the conditions within broader society? And to make it even a bit wider, why should students be internationalist? Why should they be concerned with atrocities, wars, genocides going on the other side of the world? Why is this the concern of a student?
Well, I think that the question of ethics and the question of social responsibility and the question of social justice doesn't end within national borders. I mean, I think if justice matters, if equality matters, if equity matters, then I think we need to realize that democracy is an international phenomenon and should be fought for as such. I mean, I think it means that, that the question of the global now is really the space of justice and equality. The global is a space where, in some way, we need to understand interconnections that bypass the national. I mean, look, let's be honest. I mean, my friend Zygmunt Bauman used to say that, power is global and politics is local, meaning that there is a global elite that now shape politics all over the world, whether we're talking about climate change, or we're talking about massive degrees of inequality, or we're talking about the support for authoritarian regimes. So I think it's impossible to situate ourselves outside of a global understanding and lead ourselves to believe that justice is so parochial that we don't have to worry about the rest of the world. Of course we have to worry about the rest of the world. Of course we have to worry about what's happening in Gaza. Of course we have to worry about what's happening in some way in Turkey and in Hungary, because these places become maps for the rest of the world. These places become models that in some fundamental way teach us about not only how we're interconnected, but how the forces of oppression are interconnected. And I think to take that a step further, that suggests something about how the forces and social movements for justice have to be interconnected. We have to learn from each other. Students in Canada and the United States, and the Black Lives Movement, for instance, in the United States, are learning from Palestinian students. Students in Gaza are learning from students who are revolting in Serbia. So this notion of international solidarity is absolutely crucial, because I can't imagine any movement being taken seriously if it doesn't operate on an international and global level in the name of global justice and in the name of solidarity.
And to speak in terms of learning from students on the other side of the world, learning from movements in their internationalist approach, wherever they may be coming from, I wanted to bring to this question of winning. I think it's very difficult for students in North America, throughout the world, to understand what would it actually look like for us to have the power that we want to have. What would it actually look like for our movements to be successful in achieving the demands that we are demanding of institutions and so on. So I wanted to ask you, what does winning look like for critical students who are trying to get organized? What might real, meaningful self-determination or empowerment look like for students?
I think that when we talk about winning, what we need to talk about are what are the goals that we're after that in some way make sense in terms of what it means not to be canceled out of the future. And I think for too many students, being canceled out of the future is a reality that they're not only living with, but a reality that they feel they're absolutely compelled to address. And I think that what winning in this sense, particularly around education, means, it means in some way trying to get organized so that they have enough power collectively to be able to, and this is the weak side of the argument, to have a voice in shaping the institutions in which they find themselves. I mean, it seems to me, if education is really about learning how to govern rather than be governed, then we need to take seriously what it means collectively to work in ways in which the question of power becomes central to the question of justice. And the question of power collectively becomes central to the question of struggle. So I think at one level, at a more abstract level, I think that's what that means. I think at another level, it means they've got to take somewhat control over the educational process, right? I mean, they can't allow these institutions to be defined as corporations, or in the United States, they can't allow these institutions to be able to ship arms to countries that are engaging in genocide. I mean, I think they need to retake and take back the notion of higher education as a democratic public good. How does it defend democracy, and how does it enable democracy? And what roles should students play in that? I mean, in some way, education should be meaningful, to be critical, to be transformative. And that in part should be defined by students. I mean, these disciplinary boundaries, these forms of testing terrorism, the elimination of fun. Education should be free. Let's be honest here. It shouldn't be accessible to simply a few people, and it should be supported by a government that refuses to invest in the military and is willing to invest in the public good. I mean, so it seems to me winning means reshaping the priorities of the society in which students find themselves. And it means doing it through social movements. It means organizing in ways that place pressure on administration, but even more so, it means connecting with other social movements. The task of young people today in education is to convince people who don't have children in education, who are paying taxes and are saying things like, you know the story, Owen, who are saying, well, what does it have to do with us? Well, education has to do with democracy. If you don't have an informed citizenry, you don't have democracy, as we're seeing in the United States, full-blown right now. So it seems to me they have to do three things. They have to help to redefine higher education as a public good. They need to have certainly fundamental forms of power to be able to shape those institutions. And thirdly, they have got to convince the public that education is crucial for democracy for everyone on a national and international level, as opposed to being something marginal that we equate with training, equipping a global workforce. I mean, all the kinds of, or simply being indoctrination centers, as we're seeing under Trump, right? So it seems to me those three issues strike me as fundamental to what winning means.
When students go on strike, when they occupy college or university campuses, what kinds of educational spaces do they have the potential to create? What is the significance of refusing the sort of neoliberal status quo of the university or college and turning toward self-directed, self-governed pedagogical approaches, including teach-ins and workshops? What critical or liberationist potential do these spaces create?
I mean, I think that, first of all, these spaces operate in ways that enable young people to raise questions that are often not raised in the university. Secondly, they offer space for the kind of solidarity which suggests that learning is collective and not just simply individual. Thirdly, they learn that if they're going to talk about education, they have to talk about it as a moral and political project, and not just simply something that basically can be written off as the grounds for training. So they're really redefining what education means. But I think for me, to see students occupy those spaces not only challenge, it seems to be the most oppressive forms of education in the university, they offer us a space for what I would call communities of resistance. They're spaces where a culture of questioning not only gets affirmed and enacted, but it becomes a space where students begin to learn that what education is really about is the shaping of their own agency. That what it's really about is the shaping their own identities collectively. That what it's really about is learning that through a culture of questioning and solidarity, that what they don't want to buy into is a notion of education in which they become voiceless and hence powerless. And I think that there's something about that power to be able to collectively learn how to shape their own lives through education, which then becomes, if I may, Owen, central to politics. I mean, these are not just spaces where people are removed from dominant power. These are spaces where young people are learning collectively how to challenge power, how to work collectively in those institutions in ways in which they're not isolated, that their views are not privatized, that they can connect what they do to larger systems of power. That's an enormous, enormous mode of consciousness awakening for students. You have to feel power bodily and not just intellectually to understand what it means.
Now, Henry, you were a grad student in the United States during the height of the 1960s anti-war movement, student movements, and civil rights movements. What lessons can we take from the actions and reactions of the student movements of the 1960s and 1970s?
Owen, I'll tell you, probably the best period of my life politically was in the 60s. And it was a period in which it seems to me one of the great lessons of that period was that people organized in ways to build coalitions across different struggles. That was an amazing sense of what politics meant without being isolated, siloed. There was a passion for organizing, not just in terms of bringing different groups together, but I have to tell you, the notion of radical democracy then was everywhere. It was on young people's lips. People had a larger narrative to bring people together. I mean, these movements showed in a very powerful way and gave birth to a number of movements, the gay rights movement, the civil rights movements. They understood what it meant to confront power with a narrative that basically spoke to the future in a way in which people could understand, whether it was the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement. Remember, these were not just movements based on theoretical presuppositions. I mean, SDS was brilliant during this period. This is a period of C. Wright Mills. This is a period of Herbert Marcuse. This is a period in which Angela Davis was speaking. The world was alive with a kind of passion for justice. But it wasn't a passion for justice that became a spectacle. It was a passion for justice that was enacted in modes of solidarity in a movement in which you could breathe the passion of politics. It was there. And so it seems to me, we sort of understood, we, in the most humble sense, people of that period understood that forms of oppression are connected, that they have to be dealt with. It seems to me, in some ways, both within and outside of the capitalist system. They had a notion of what radical democracy looked like. And so in some ways, they were very dangerous because it was difficult to co-opt them into a pro-capitalist, Robert Reich kind of capitalism is okay, let's save it, it's not that bad. I mean, they had a sense of socialism. They knew what democratic socialism was about in many ways. And they fought for it. They fought for it theoretically, and they fought for it with their bodies collectively. And so that was a great moment for me in history that is being, of course it's being recreated, but this is a different time. It's a different time. Oppression, to me, is less a matter of overt force today than it is a matter of consciousness being undermined. And, Elon Musk, if I may use it as a verb. And I think that you understand what I'm saying.
And to speak of this new period, which is distinct in the ways that you described from previous generations that have encountered these problems, Over the summer of 2024, we saw thousands upon thousands of students uniting internationally in the use of the tactic of pro-Palestine student encampments on college and university campuses throughout the world to protest the genocide and scholasticide in Gaza. What does this historic rupture say about today's youth raised among a culture of hopelessness? What does this say about the state of higher education and the state of the consciousness of the contemporary student?
Well, I mean, at one level, it talks about young people who have come to realize that the institutions that in many ways are supposed to educate them have betrayed them. And I think they've taken that very seriously. I mean, I can't tell you how proud I am of your generation. I mean, these are kids who are walking onto campuses and all of a sudden they look up and there are snipers on the roofs. I mean, these are kids who are being beaten, who are being abducted, who are being sent to prisons in Louisiana and who God knows in El Salvador. I think these are students who recognize, given the state of emerging fascism all across the world, globally, that they simply have to stand up to this, that the consequences are just much too great. They don't view what's going on in Palestine as simply one heightened example of the reemergence of fascism. They see it as part of a moral order that's connected globally. What's happening in Palestine, what's happening in Gaza, basically in a lesser sense, whether we talk about scholasticide, or we talk about the banning of books, or we talk about putting dissidents in jail, it's also happening in a lesser scale in the United States. And I say this with great emphasis. Gaza is a laboratory. They know that. It's a laboratory for dehumanization, seduction, fascism, and genocide. And it has to be fought and understood in those terms. It's not something that's far away. It's something that is legitimating what it wants to do everywhere. That's why in the United States, you have troops right now in LA. I mean, that's why the discourse of disposability is now connected with the militarized discourse of occupation. And they get that. But I think that what I really see in this generation is such a sense of moral outrage, coupled with a sense of the need for collective justice that, I mean, it's mind-blowing. I mean, spaces for them years ago that were relatively safe. Remember, in the 60s, we traveled outside of the campus, right? Lunch counters, anti-war demonstration. These students are being denied diplomas. They're being put in jail. They're being abducted. Are you ready for writing an op-ed in a school newspaper? So it seems to me that the threshold for these students, for what injustice looks like, has been crossed so dramatically, so overwhelmingly, that they absolutely refuse to buy in to the logic of looking away and sort of getting their diploma so they can work for Goldman Sachs. You know, that's very threatening, it seems to me, to a wide variety of dictators, whether it's Owen or whether it's Trump or whether it's the guy in Argentina. I mean, you know, the attack on young people is really the most powerful attack that we have seen in this emerging age of fascism, because they are truly dangerous, because they're willing not only to hold power accountable, they're willing to fight for it collectively.
My last question to finish off this interview is, can we imagine a decent future for higher education in Canada? What would it look like for our public post-secondary institutions to invest in criticality, agency, and democracy?
I think, look, it's an important question. It's a general question. But I think the first thing that these institutions have to do is redefine what they're for. You know, these institutions are not simply STEM institutions that whose ultimate purpose is to accumulate capital and mimic corporations that basically would like to control them, right? In the United States, you have demands being made by governments and by billionaires in which they want to control who's admitted, they want to control what the curriculum looks like, and they want to control how faculty are hired. Think about that. I think that what students need to understand is that we need to go back into history and ask ourselves, what are the parallels here in terms of what we're seeing happening to higher education? The parallels of fascism, the parallels of Nazi Germany, the parallels of Argentina, the parallels of Chile under Pinochet, where students were thrown out of planes into the ocean, the parallels of a dissent being linked to a death march. And I think in some ways what universities have to do, and what we have to push universities to do, is to reclaim themselves as a public good. That would mean putting resources into government, putting resources into education in ways in which A, education becomes free. B, realigning these curriculums in ways in which the liberal and illiberal arts matter for everybody. I mean, it seems to me if students can't learn what social responsibility is, and are told that the only thing that we should learn is based on the profitability of what a job looks like once we graduate, the university is dead. Its critical function has to be more, we have to breathe life into its critical function. Thirdly, these institutions have got to give power back to faculty and students. These institutions are governed now by a managerial elite who resemble accountants in pencil factories. I mean, you know, these are not places that cultivate, it seems to me, a culture of questioning. These are not institutions that are aligned with what it means to defend and enable democracy. These are corporate institutions at one level, and in the age of emerging fascism, they're indoctrination centers at the other. That's got to be challenged, and that's got to be fought. And it seems to me that I don't know what that's going to take in terms of how students are going to address this, but the first issue is awareness. The first issue is to raise the question of what a university looks like in a democracy, how it serves students, how power is used in ways that are shared by faculty, administration, and young people, and begin to redefine what the university means. And at every level to challenge that university to the degree that it becomes nothing more than a corporate entity, or it becomes a site of enormous oppression that aligns itself with basically fascist instinct, fascist principles, fascist values, and fascist social relations.